I built my business from nothing and let my brother buy in as a partner. 2 years later, he voted me out of my own company with the shares I helped him buy. I gave him the opportunity, helped him get the funding, trained him from scratch, and he used everything I gave him to push me out the door. My name is Nathan Reeves. I'm 41 years old. 15 years ago, I started a commercial landscaping and property maintenance company out of my driveway with a used truck, a commercial mower I bought on credit, and about $4,000 in savings. Last year, I was voted out of that company by my brother. The brother I let in. The brother I trained. The brother I helped finance into a 30% ownership stake because I believed in second chances and I believed in family. He used the shares I helped him buy, combined with shares he quietly sold to an investor I had never met, to call a formal ownership vote and remove me as CEO of the company I had built from nothing. He then sat down in my chair, at my desk, in my office, with my employees around him, and told me I was welcome to remain as a passive investor. I was not welcome to remain as a passive investor. I hired an attorney and spent the next 18 months in a legal process that cost me a third of what I ultimately recovered. By the time it was over, 2 of my largest clients had been moved to a new company registered in my sister-in-law's name. I walked away from my own company with a settlement that was less than half of what it should have been worth. And I have not spoken to my brother since. This is what it looks like when you trust the wrong person. This is what it looks like when that person is your family. I need to go back to the beginning, because where I started matters for understanding how far I fell. I grew up in Colorado Springs. Middle class, but just barely. Dad worked construction. Mom worked at a grocery store chain for 30 years. They were good people. Honest. They believed in working for what you had and not complaining about what you didn't. I have one sibling, Derek. He's 7 years younger than me. Growing up, I was the serious one. The one who came home and did homework without being asked. The one who got a part-time job at 16 and saved half of everything I made. The one who read books about small business because something in me, from a very young age, wanted to build something that was mine. Derek was the charming one. Quick to laugh, quick with a story, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately knew how to read it. He had the social intelligence that I always admired from a distance because I knew I didn't have it the same way he did. We were close, in the way that brothers 7 years apart can be close, which is to say, more like 2 separate eras of the same family than 2 people who grew up side by side. I left for Denver at 22 to take a job with a landscaping contractor. Derek was still in high school. I spent 4 years working for other people's companies, learning everything I could: how to estimate a commercial job, how to manage a crew, how to talk to property managers and HOA boards and facilities directors. I was not the fastest or the most naturally talented, but I was consistent and I paid attention and I remembered everything. At 26, I quit and started Reeves Property Services. The early years were genuinely hard, not romanticized hard, the way people sometimes describe entrepreneurship to make themselves sound heroic. Actually hard. I was doing 6-day weeks for the first 2 years. I slept badly. I drove myself to the edge of burnout more than once. There were months when I didn't pay myself at all so I could make payroll for the 2 guys I had hired, because I had promised them steady work and I was not going to break that promise. The first winter nearly ended it. I had underbid a snow removal contract because I did not yet understand the full cost structure of running equipment through a Colorado winter, and I lost money for 3 straight months. I pulled out a personal credit card to cover a payroll shortfall in February. I remember sitting at the kitchen table of my apartment, looking at a bank balance that had no business being that low, doing the math on whether I had enough runway to reach spring. I reached spring. Barely. I spent most of that summer doing door-to-door outreach to commercial property managers, showing up at office parks and industrial buildings and HOA management offices with a folder of photos from jobs I had completed and a rate sheet I had revised many times. Most people didn't take meetings. Some took meetings and went with someone else. A few took meetings and called me back. The clients who gave me a chance in those early years, I remember every single one of them. A property manager named Ron who oversaw 4 buildings on the southeast side of Denver. A facilities director named Karen at a mid-sized tech company who gave me a grounds maintenance contract when she had at least 3 more established companies to choose from. A commercial real estate manager who had had a bad experience with a larger contractor and decided to try a small, owner-operated operation as a result. I sent Ron a handwritten note every Christmas for all 15 of those years. I still think of Karen whenever I'm putting together an estimate for a commercial property of that type. Those early clients were not just revenue. They were the proof of concept. They were the validation that the thing I was trying to build was actually possible. But I was building something. Every year it grew, first by small amounts, then by larger ones. By year 4, I had 6 employees and had signed my first property management contract with a company that owned several commercial office parks in the Denver metro area. That contract was the turning point. It gave me stable, recurring revenue to build around, and it gave me a reputation I could point to when I walked into rooms with other commercial property managers. By year 7, Reeves Property Services had 12 employees, 3 commercial vehicles, contracts with 19 clients, an annual revenue of $1.2 million. I want to be precise about that number because it matters for what comes later. $1.2 million in revenue. Net profit margin of approximately 18% after payroll, equipment, and overhead. This was not a hobby. This was not a side project. This was a real, functioning, profitable business that I had built entirely with my own labor, my own risk, and my own money. I owned it outright. No partners. No investors. Every decision was mine. Every client relationship was mine. Every piece of equipment had been bought with money I had earned. I was proud of it. I am still proud of it, even now, even after everything. Derek called me in March of that year. He was 26 at the time. He had been running a fast casual restaurant in Colorado Springs for 3 years. A concept he had developed himself, elevated Tex-Mex, his description, that had started with genuine promise and ended, as many restaurants do, in a combination of bad timing, thin margins, and decisions that were harder to defend in retrospect than they had seemed at the time. He had lost his savings. He had taken on debt. His girlfriend had left him over the stress of it. He was, by his own account, in the worst shape of his life. "I need to talk to you," he said on the phone. "About work. About what I'm going to do next." "Okay," I said. "Come up." He drove to Denver that weekend. We sat at my kitchen table, and he laid it out plainly. The restaurant was done. He was going to have to file for personal bankruptcy to manage the debt. He needed a complete restart. He had been thinking, for a while, about whether there was a way he could be part of what I had built. "I want to buy into the business," he said. "Not a favor. An actual buy-in. I want to work for it. I want to earn it." I sat with that for a moment. I had always run the company alone. I had never wanted a partner, exactly, because partners mean shared decisions, and I was used to being the only decision maker. But there was also a part of me that had been feeling, for a year or two, that the business needed a stronger operational layer to grow to the next level. I was still too involved in day-to-day execution. I needed someone who could manage operations so I could focus on client development and strategy. And he was my brother. The idea of building something together, of having family beside me in the thing I had spent a decade constructing, had a pull to it that I did not examine as carefully as I should have. "If this happens," I said, "it's a real business arrangement. You work. You learn. You earn the respect of the team. This isn't a position. It's a partnership." "That's what I want," he said. "And you'd need to buy in. I'm not giving equity away. You'd need to actually have skin in the game." "I know. I want that. I want to actually own something." We talked for hours. I told him what a 30% stake would cost, based on a conservative valuation of the company. It was $220,000. He didn't have it. He had nothing. He had just filed for bankruptcy. So I did something I now understand was the first of several mistakes. I called my business bank, the one I had used for 8 years, the one that had financed my first equipment loans and had watched the company grow, and I asked them whether Derek could get a business acquisition loan with me as a personal guarantor. They said it was possible. They knew me. They trusted my track record. I vouched for my brother with my own credit and my own reputation. The loan was approved. Derek began making payments on a 30% ownership stake in Reeves Property Services. The arrangement was structured so that if he stopped making payments or left the company, his shares would revert to me. I thought that was sufficient protection. It was not. He started in May. I spent the first 6 months training him, not just showing him around. actually training him. How to read a commercial property and write an accurate estimate. How to manage the crew leads. How to talk to clients. How to handle the operational side of the business that I had built over 15 years through trial and error and a lot of expensive mistakes that I was handing to him for free. I want to be specific about what that training looked like because I think it matters. I took Derek on every major client visit for the first 3 months. Every one. I introduced him by name to every facilities director, every property manager, every HOA representative we worked with. I said explicitly in each of those introductions, "This is my brother Derek. He's my partner. You'll be hearing from him directly going forward." I was transferring my relationship capital, the trust those clients had in me, built over years, to him. I was doing it intentionally and generously because I believed we were building something together. I showed him my estimating process. The actual process, the formulas I had developed, the cost assumptions I used, the margin structures that had taken me years of adjustment to get right. I gave him access to every client file, every contract, every piece of correspondence. I said, "Here is everything I know. Build on it." He absorbed it quickly. He was a quick learner. I will give him that. He had the social intelligence I mentioned earlier, the ability to walk into a room and immediately find the frequency of the person he was talking to. Within 3 months, clients were commenting on how much they liked working with him. Within 6 months, he had taken over the day-to-day client communication for about half our accounts. I was genuinely pleased. This was what I had hoped for. I felt, for the first time in years, like the business had room to breathe. Like I could think about the next phase of growth without being pulled back into operational fires every day. I made him operations director, gave him a formal title, a raise, and an office with his name on the door. Looking back, I see every one of those steps clearly for what they were. I was giving him the infrastructure of legitimacy, a title that clients would respect, a salary that made him feel equal, an office that marked his territory. I was doing it out of genuine generosity and genuine belief in the arrangement. I was not naive so much as I was invested in the idea that this was going to work, that this was going to be good, that the instinct to bring my brother in had been right. The warning signs came slowly, the way they always do when you're close to something. The first one I noticed, but did not act on. Derek began scheduling client lunches and site visits without copying me or telling me about them. When I mentioned it, he said he was just handling it. That was his job, wasn't it? To manage operations? I agreed that it was and let it go. The second one, 2 of my senior crew leads, guys I had hired years ago, guys I trusted, guys who had been with the company through the hard early years, started deferring to Derek on scheduling and job decisions rather than coming to me. Not dramatically, just a shift in who they reported to, who they brought problems to, who they looked at when there was a question in the room. At the time, I interpreted this as Derek successfully building his authority as operations director. It was, instead, something else entirely. The third one, Derek started talking about the company differently in client conversations. Not Nathan's company, our company, which would have been fine. He was a partner, except that the emphasis had a quality to it that was harder to name. He was not saying our to be inclusive. He was saying our to establish a different kind of story. One where he was central and I was peripheral. There was a fourth one that I did not even register as a warning sign until it was all over. He asked me, about 14 months into the partnership, whether I had ever thought about what the business would look like if we brought an outside investment. I said I hadn't, that I'd always preferred to grow organically, that outside investors meant outside influence on decisions, and I wasn't interested in that. He nodded, said he understood. The conversation moved on. 8 months later, I learned he had already been in conversations with Greg for 6 of those months. I noticed these things. I did not connect them. I did not want to connect them, because connecting them would have required me to consider the possibility that my brother, the person I had vouched for, helped finance, trained, introduced to my clients, and given a title and an office, was working against me. And I was not ready to believe that until it was sitting across from me at a conference table. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in October, in year 2 of the partnership. Derek asked me to come into the conference room. He said he needed to discuss something about the company's direction. Greg was sitting at the table. I had never met Greg. Derek introduced him as a longtime friend, a business person, someone who had been interested in the landscaping and property maintenance sector. He was polished and relaxed in the way that people with money tend to be relaxed, not nervous, not apologetic, just present, as though the room had been expecting him. Derek explained that he had sold Greg a 31% ownership stake in Reeves Property Services. I stared at him. "You sold shares," I said. "Yes." Without telling me. The operating agreement allows any owner to sell up to 49% of their personal stake without triggering right of first refusal, as long as the total external ownership doesn't exceed. "Derek," he stopped. "You sold shares in my company to someone I've never met, without a conversation, and you're explaining it to me with contract language. It's within the agreement, Nathan. That is not the point, and you know it." Greg said something about his enthusiasm for the business and his confidence in the leadership team. I did not respond to him. I was looking at my brother. And then Derek said what he had clearly prepared to say. "With Greg's shares combined with mine, we hold 60% of the company. We'd like to formalize the leadership structure. We're proposing that you step down as CEO and transition to a senior advisor and equity holder role. I would take over as CEO." I want to describe what that moment felt like, because I think it matters. I had been sitting in that conference room, which I had rented, furnished, and paid for more than a decade, for thousands of meetings. I knew every crack in the ceiling. I knew the way the afternoon light came through the west window at 4 o'clock. I had signed the lease for that office on a Tuesday morning when I had 5 employees and was terrified the business would fail before the end of the year. And my brother was sitting across from me with a man I had never met, using the shares I had helped him finance, combined with shares he had sold without telling me, to tell me that I was no longer in charge of what I had built. I kept my voice flat. I told them I would need time to consult with legal counsel before responding to anything. Derek said he understood. Greg said he looked forward to working with me. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. Then I went inside and called an attorney. The next 18 months were not the kind of thing you want to live through twice. I want to describe what that legal process actually felt like from the inside, because I think there is a version of this kind of story where the litigation phase gets summarized in a sentence or two, and people come away thinking it was a clean, logical process with a clear outcome. It was not. It was expensive, slow, emotionally corrosive, and full of moments where the outcome felt genuinely uncertain. My attorney, a business litigation specialist in Denver who had handled dozens of partnership disputes, told me at our first meeting that forced buyout cases in Colorado had unpredictable timelines and that we should prepare for anywhere from 12 to 30 months. He told me to budget accordingly and to not make any major financial decisions under the assumption of a particular settlement amount or timeline. I took that seriously, and I was still not fully prepared for what 18 months in a legal dispute with a family member actually costs, not just in money, but in sleep and in focus and in the way it colonizes your thinking so that you cannot go through a day without the whole situation reasserting itself at some unexpected moment. The depositions were particularly hard. I sat across from Derek in a conference room with our respective attorneys on a Tuesday in February, about 5 months into the process, and answered questions for 4 hours while he sat 12 feet away from me. We did not make eye contact. We did not speak directly. We communicated entirely through the procedural language of the legal setting, as though we were strangers who had become adversaries rather than brothers who had grown up in the same house. At one point, Derek's attorney asked me whether I had ever made Derek feel like a subordinate rather than a partner. I thought about it carefully before I answered. I said that it had not been my intention to do so, but that I acknowledged the power dynamic of the situation, that I was the founder, the original owner, the one with the established relationships, was real, and that Derek may have experienced aspects of that dynamic as limiting. His attorney nodded and wrote something down. Derek still did not look at me. I will be honest, I made my own mistakes in the legal process. Early on, when I was still angry in a way that wasn't strategic, I made statements in written communications that my attorney later had to work to contain. I sent Derek a text the night of the conference room meeting that said things I cannot take back and would not repeat here. I let the personal dimension of the betrayal bleed into professional decisions more than I should have. But the more significant mistakes had been made before any of it became legal. The mistake of vouching for Derek with my own credit without an airtight shareholder agreement that protected me from exactly this scenario. The mistake of giving him client relationships without ensuring those relationships were formally and contractually tied to the company entity rather than to individual contact managers. The mistake of trusting that because he was my brother, certain protections were unnecessary. The operating agreement I had written in year one, before Derek was involved, was not designed for a partnership. It had been written to govern a sole-owner company and had been only minimally updated when Derek came in. The right of first refusal clause had a gap in it, the one Derek had cited in the conference room, that my original attorney had not caught because neither of us had been thinking adversarially when we wrote it. Derek had, apparently, been thinking adversarially for quite some time. My attorney filed for a forced buyout under Colorado business dissolution statutes. Derek and Greg contested it. What followed was depositions, document production, financial audits, competing valuations of the company, and a series of mediation sessions that each ended without resolution. During the legal process, I discovered the full picture of what had been happening. Derek had been cultivating the two senior crew leads for at least a year before the meeting in the conference room. He had given them informal raises out of the operational budget, raises I technically had visibility into but had not scrutinized because I trusted his management of day-to-day costs. He had told them, according to their later testimony, that the company was going to be restructured and that their positions would be more secure under new leadership. He had also been in conversations with Greg for approximately 8 months before the ownership transfer was executed. They had discussed the acquisition, the leadership structure, and the plan for the company's expansion, all while Derek was, in his role as operations director, representing to me that things were going well and that he was fully committed to the vision we had discussed. The LLC registered in his wife's name, Greenline Property Solutions, filed 7 months before the conference room meeting, had been used to quietly offer 2 of my 3 largest commercial clients a transition of services. Both clients had been told, through Derek's personal relationships with their facilities managers, that Reeves Property Services was going through a significant leadership restructuring and that Greenline was the continuity option. One client had already signed with Greenline by the time I learned it existed. The second signed during the litigation. Those 2 clients had represented approximately $400,000 of annual revenue. The buyout settlement, reached after 16 months of litigation, was for $620,000. My legal fees were $210,000. My net recovery was $410,000. A fair valuation of my 40% stake in a healthy Reeves Property Services, before the client losses, before the disruption, before 18 months of legal warfare had damaged vendor relationships and employee morale, would have been somewhere between $550,000 and $600,000. And that was for my 40% stake alone, in a company that was, at the time Derek executed his plan, worth considerably more than it was worth by the time we settled. He had cost me not just my company, but a significant portion of the value I had built over 15 years. I want to talk about my parents for a moment, because this story does not exist in a vacuum. Our parents were still alive when all of this happened. Dad had retired. Mom had retired. They lived in the same house in Colorado Springs they had lived in for 30 years. When the legal process became public within the family, when my aunt called my mom and my cousin called my dad, and the story began to travel through the people who knew us both, my parents were devastated in the way that parents of adult children in conflict are devastated. They loved both of us. They did not want to choose. They asked, repeatedly, if there was a way to resolve it without the courts. I told them that the time for resolving it without courts had been before my brother secretly sold shares to an investor and removed me from my own company. My father called Derek and told him, from what my father later shared with me, that what he had done was wrong, that it did not matter what the operating agreement technically allowed, that there was a difference between legal and right. Derek told my father that I had never treated him as an equal partner, that I had always made him feel like he was working in my shadow, that everything I had done, including helping him finance the buy-in, was a form of control rather than generosity. I will not say that Derek's feelings about our dynamic were entirely fabricated. He may have genuinely felt those things. We were 7 years apart. He had spent his whole life in the role of younger brother, and it is possible that working for me, even with a partnership title and his own office, triggered something he had never resolved about what it meant to be second. What I will say is that whatever he felt does not justify what he did. Feeling like someone is controlling does not justify using their generosity as a mechanism to take their life's work. Feeling like you're in someone's shadow does not justify a quiet, months-long plan to move clients into your wife's company before triggering a forced leadership change. Those are choices. Those are decisions made with full awareness of their consequences. Those are not the actions of someone who felt wronged. Those are the actions of someone who had already decided the outcome they wanted and worked methodically toward it while smiling at dinner. My brother is still running Reeves Property Services. He changed the name to Reeves Kerrigan Property Group, a nod to his wife's family name, about 6 months after the settlement. He added 2 new clients. He hired a replacement for me as a business development director. The company I built is still operating. It just doesn't have my name on it anymore. And it doesn't have me. I spent about 8 months in a dark place after the settlement. I am being honest about that because I think pretending otherwise would be dishonest, and because I think the people who watch these stories sometimes need to hear that what follows a betrayal of this scale is not immediate recovery. It is grief, real grief, in the same territory as other losses I have experienced. The company had been the central project of my adult life. It was not just income or net worth. It was my identity. It was the thing I had made, and it was gone. I did not handle those 8 months particularly well. I drank more than I should have. I isolated from people who were trying to help. I turned down a consulting contract that would have gotten me back into the industry faster because I was not ready to be around anything that reminded me of what I had lost. I also spent too much of that period in my own head, going over and over the sequence of events, looking for the moment I could have stopped it, the conversation where I should have asked different questions, the contract clause I should have caught, the warning sign I should have connected. I ran those scenarios endlessly, in the way that the mind does when it is trying to restore a sense of control over something that went out of control. The honest answer is that there was not one single moment. There were many, and I missed them all because I was looking at the situation with the eyes of someone who trusted the other person in it. That is not a character flaw. That is just what trust looks like when it has not yet been violated. My father called me every Sunday during those 8 months. Not to give advice, not to fix anything, just to call. We talked about whatever was on television, about how his tomato plants were doing, about the Colorado avalanche season. He never once made me feel like I needed to be further along in my recovery than I was. He just kept calling. I am grateful for that more than I can fully express. There was also a conversation about 5 months after the settlement that I want to describe because it shifted something for me. I had coffee with a former employee, Marcus, one of the original crew leads from the early years, the ones who had not been recruited into Derek's camp. He had left the company shortly after the ownership change, unwilling to work under the new structure. We met at a diner near his apartment. He told me things he had observed during the period leading up to the conference room meeting, things he had not come forward with during the legal process because he had not wanted to be involved, and which he was now telling me because the whole thing was resolved and he thought I deserved to understand the full picture. He described a meeting Derek had held with the 2 senior crew leads about a year before the vote. A meeting Marcus had accidentally arrived early for and had heard part of. Derek had told those leads that the company was going to look very different soon, and that their futures were more secure if they were aligned with the operational side of the business, which he oversaw, than with the client development side, which was implicitly me. That meeting had happened 13 months before the conference room. 13 months. Derek had been working on this for over a year. Every morning during those 13 months, he sat across from me at the weekly staff meeting and nodded and discussed the business and drank coffee and gave no indication that he had already started building the exit ramp. When Marcus told me this, I sat with it for a long time before I said anything. Then I said, "Thank you for telling me." I did not feel what I expected to feel. I expected anger. What I felt was something closer to relief, because it confirmed what I had suspected but had never been able to fully prove. This was not a sudden decision. This was not a moment of weakness or opportunism. This was deliberate. It was planned. It was executed over an extended period of time by someone who had made a choice to do it and then spent more than a year carrying out that choice while presenting himself as my partner. Knowing that, Somehow, made it easier to stop looking for the single moment I could have caught it. There was no single moment. He had been doing it continuously. The only way I could have caught it was to have known, from the beginning, that the trust one was extending was not going to be honored. And I could not have known that. I chose to trust my brother. That was the right thing to do with the information I had. The problem was not my choice. The problem was who he turned out to be. My father called me every Sunday during that period. I have already said that, but I want to say it again because it was the most important thing that happened to me in those 8 months. I started over at 40 years old. I want to say that plainly because I think there is a cultural story about entrepreneurship that treats starting over as an easy, even romantic thing. Start over, rebuild, rise again. The narrative is clean and upward. Starting over at 40, after losing a business you built for 15 years to your own brother's betrayal, while carrying legal debt and the psychological residue of 18 months in a courtroom, is not clean and is not romantic. It is hard in a specific way that I had not experienced before. Because at 26, when I started the first time, I had nothing to lose. I was building from zero, and failure just meant going back to working for someone else. At 40, starting over means building with the knowledge of what you had. Building with the memory of your own name on trucks you no longer own. Building with the awareness, every day, of the difference between where you are and where you were. I started a new property maintenance operation 14 months after the settlement. Smaller, smarter, I think, in the ways that matter. The shareholder agreement this time was written by a business litigation attorney who charged me $8,000 and who told me, when we finished, that he wished more clients came to him before the crisis rather than during it. The client contracts have assignment clauses that bind the relationship to the corporate entity, not to any individual. The employment agreements have non-solicitation provisions. Every protection I should have had the first time, I have now. Starting over also meant rebuilding the thing that takes the longest to rebuild, a reputation in a market where the people you need to know already have relationships with your former company. Several commercial property managers in Denver knew me from the old days. Some of them reached out when they heard what had happened. The industry is smaller than it looks, and word travels. A few of them became my first clients at Highline. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything in the early months. I had a conversation with Karen, the facilities director from the early years who had taken a chance on me the first time, about 8 months after I started Highline. She had stayed with Reeves Kerrigan after the transition, which I understood. Business continuity is real, and I did not hold it against her. But she reached out after hearing I had relaunched, and we had coffee. She told me she had noticed, after the ownership change, that the quality of service and communication had declined, that the attentiveness she had valued, the owner actually caring about whether the property looked right, had been replaced with something more transactional. She became a Highline client 4 months after that coffee. I want to be clear that I am not telling this story to make Derek a villain and myself a hero. Life is not structured that way, and neither are family relationships. Derek may have had genuine grievances about the power dynamic in our partnership that I was not adequately attending to. He may have felt, legitimately, that the 7-year age gap and my founder status made it structurally difficult for him to grow into an equal role. What I will say, and I believe this completely, is that the answer to those grievances was a direct conversation. It was not a months-long plan executed in secret while presenting a false front of partnership and loyalty. Whatever Derek felt, he chose the path he took, and that choice had consequences for both of us that neither of us can fully undo. I have 7 employees currently, 3 commercial clients. Revenue this year will be somewhere around $380,000. It is not where I was. Not yet. It might not get there again. I am realistic about the math of starting over at 40 in a market where my former company, with its rebranded name and intact client base, is a direct competitor. But it is mine in a way that is clean and uncomplicated, and the cleanness of it has a value I did not fully understand when I had it the first time. I do not speak to Derek. My parents have accepted this, though it cost them. My father told me last Thanksgiving that he understood why, that he was not asking me to change it, and that he loved both of his sons and was not going to pretend the situation was anything other than what it was. That was the most honest and the most generous thing anyone has said to me about the whole of it. My mother sends me food sometimes. drives up from Colorado Springs with a cooler in the back of her car, drops it off, stays for coffee, and doesn't mention Derek. That is also a form of love, and I receive it as such. I am in a relationship now, someone I met through a mutual friend about a year after the settlement, and she knows the full story. She did not try to minimize it or reframe it into a growth experience before I was ready for it to be a growth experience. She just listened. Over time, the story became something I could tell without the same level of heat it used to carry. That is what time does, if you're lucky, and if you do some of the internal work. It doesn't erase what happened. It changes the temperature of it. People ask me what I would have done differently, and I have a clear answer, which I'll share because I think it might be useful. I would have treated the business arrangement like a business arrangement from the first moment. Not because I didn't love my brother, and not because I wasn't glad to give him an opportunity, but because love and business are not the same thing, and conflating them is how you end up in a conference room learning that you've been managed out of your own company. I would have had an attorney review the operating agreement before Derek signed anything. Not my general business attorney who mostly handles contracts. A specific business litigation attorney whose job is to look at documents and imagine the worst case and protect against it. I would have had explicit clauses about the right of first refusal on any ownership transfer, with no exceptions and no gaps. I would have had clauses requiring all new partner introductions to be approved by both existing partners. I would have had non-compete agreements for all officers with direct client relationships. I would have not used my personal credit to guarantee a business loan for a family member who wanted equity in something I had spent 15 years building. That last one is the one that hurts the most to say, because it was also the most generous thing I did. I used my own reputation, my own financial history, my own relationship with my bank to give my brother access to something he could not otherwise have accessed. And he used that access as the foundation for everything that came after. Being generous is not the mistake. The mistake is being generous without structure, without clear agreements, without the acknowledgement that people, including people you love, are capable of making choices that hurt you. My company has a name now, Highline Property Services. Different name, same city, same industry, same values I started with in my driveway in year one. The trucks have my name on them again. Not the same trucks, but the name. And every morning when I see one of them parked outside a client property, I feel something that is not quite pride and not quite grief. It is something in between. A reminder of what I built, what I lost, and what I am in the process of building again. I earned the first one. I will earn this one too. Have you ever trusted a family member with something you built, only to have them use that trust against you? Have you ever helped someone get access to something they couldn't have on their own, and watched them treat that access like it was theirs by right? Have you ever had to start over at an age when starting over was supposed to be behind you? Share your experience in the comments. The people who build things take on risks that others don't, and they deserve to protect what they've made. If you believe that you cannot use the shares someone helped you buy to take the company they built, hit that like button and subscribe. Because loyalty means something. And what you build with your own hands should never be taken from you by the person who only got in because you held the door open. #voted out of my own company.